The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus went up the mountain and called to him those whom he wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he called apostles, to be with him and to be sent out to proclaim the message and to have authority to cast out demons. So Jesus appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, and Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. The Gospel inspired by God. Did you ever do any acting in high school or college? Okay. So in some senses, I want you to imagine this situation that you decide to join a Shakespearian troupe in the Bay Area. And this year, you guys put on Hamlet, and you play in Mountain View, and you come to Palo Alto, and you put on a play there, and you go to San Carlos in San Francisco. And during this season, you're starring in Hamlet, and you're playing maybe Ophelia or Polonius or whatever. And then next year, you put on a totally different play, put on Macbeth. And now you're a totally different character. You may even change genders depending on how many people are available for the group. And then you go through the entire season, and you're taking part in a totally different drama. And then the third year, you put on A Midsummer's Night Dream. The fourth year, Much Ado About Nothing. And over the course of many, many years, you play different roles in different dramas. And there are several objectives to the exercise. Firstly, you want to have fun. Secondly, you're trying to entertain an audience and maybe even inspire people. But much more importantly, you're trying to develop your acting skills. You're trying to get better and better, at this acting business. Now, I believe very strongly that that's basically the description of the life we're living, that this is a drama, that this is a cast of characters, and each of us is playing particular kinds of roles, and there's a drama we've agreed upon, and sometimes we play it, in several different roles. If you're Margaret Park, you've done it all over the world, in Nigeria and Indonesia and a whole bunch of other places. And so we put on this drama in a whole bunch of different locations for different kinds of audiences, but the cast of characters is the same. And then as we reincarnate, it's the same group of people, but we're playing totally different roles. It may even shift genders, different kinds of relationships. But again, we're trying to inspire, we're trying to have fun, and we're trying to develop our acting skills. By acting, I mean learning to love unconditionally. And we're not just there by happenstance. We don't just happen upon each other. We don't just happen to get born into a particular family in a particular location at a particular time. This is all done contractually, what I've called a preconception contract. That groups of souls migrate from lifetime to lifetime, from incarnation to incarnation. And they change relationships, they change roles, they change genders, they change the area of the world in which they're living, they change eras in human history, because when you step outside of incarnation, time is irrelevant. Your next incarnation could be in the 13th century, if you choose, if that's the place that best suits your purposes. And so we change all of these factors. And we're drawing from, it seems to me, two groups, what I would call the soul group. And when the soul group, is in a disincarnate form, for short, I'm going to call it the S-pod, so it's a soul pod or an S-pod. And then when you come into incarnation, it's an incarnation pod, or for short, an iPod. So you're part of an iPod at this stage. And so we move from lifetime to lifetime with this group of people. But we also draw people from another pod, and I call this the shadow pod. Because it's important for you to have people in your life who are really, really difficult people. And they're being drawn from a different group, a different pod. And you're going to be really difficult for somebody else. As far as somebody else is concerned, you're from their shadow pod. And as Christ says, you must love your enemies. He wasn't talking about just lying down and have people walk all over us. He was telling us, if you're serious about developing your acting skills, if you're serious about learning to love unconditionally, it's very important that you listen to what the difficult people in your life are saying to you, or the feedback they're giving to you, or what you're discovering about yourself as you try to react and relate to these difficult enemy figures. And so they're being drawn from what I would call the shadow pod. And we move from lifetime to lifetime. And you can be absolutely sure that as far as somebody else in your life is concerned, you've been drawn from their shadow pod. You're a very difficult person to get on with as far as they're concerned. Everybody else thinks you're great, but this person, thinks you're really difficult. And very often it's mutual. You think that they're very difficult, and if only you could get those out of your lives, life would be hunky-dory. But the truth is, we learn possibly more from our enemies than we learn from our friends. It's like, if you're a gardener, you realize that fertilizing is very important, but weeding is even more important. And so there are always going to be two kinds of people in our lives. There are the fertilizers who love us unconditionally, and they're very important for us because they develop our self-image, our self-esteem, our confidence in ourselves. But if there were only fertilizers in our life, we would become total narcissists. And so life arranges for us to have weeders in our lives as well. And even if they're warm to their task with glee and they exaggerate wildly, there's some core of truth to what the feedback that they're giving us. So they become a very important part of the acting troupe and the drama in which we're taking part. Now, I see that this is what is happening this morning. When Jesus goes up the mountain and he picks the 12, this is not Jesus just deciding to start a new corporation and he's looking for a CEO and a CFO and a COO. He's not looking for these kinds of people. This is a soul pod who I believe had been on the planet many, many times before. Played different roles, different relationships, different genders, whatever. But their task was, at several times in human history, to try to move on the stuck wheels of human evolution. I'm convinced personally that the entity that appeared in 550 BC as Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, was the same character that came in 6 BC as Jesus of Israel. And so that the same characters come back in different guises and play the same kinds of roles to move the evolutionary trajectory forward. So I see this group of people, not just Christ, standing up in the mountain, and there's 100 people going around, and he says, Joe, okay, Jane, I don't think so, Liz, Helen, okay, you come up. And that there's like 88 people rejected up there, and there's only 12 chosen. It's not like that. These were a group of people who were beginning to awaken to the realization that they were there by some kind of preconception contract. Mainly, it was an unconscious awareness. Why else would they leave everything, including families and professions, to follow this peripatetic preacher? Obviously, there was some inner knowing, some inner recognition that this was what they were meant to do. And so I think that part of the soul group, his father Joseph obviously was, his mother Mary obviously was, his beloved Magdalene was, and the other 12 guys, they were all part of this troupe, and they gather around him totally unaware of what they're doing. They think that this is going to be great fun. They'll all wind up dead, literally all killed except John. That's the ending for that. But they're drawn inexorably, towards their mission. And I think perhaps that this group has been on the planet since then. It may well be that they're scattered throughout the world even right now. They may be the people behind the peace movements or the ecological movements, or nuclear freeze or the reform of the prison system. They could be in these roles. We have no idea who they are, and they may be part of that right now. So that for me is who this group was. And it's interesting that there was also a member of the group who was drawn from the shadow pod. It's an interesting group. Why would Jesus pick, if he was serious about doing something important that was going to last and make a difference in the world, why would he choose fishermen, a guerrilla fighter called Simon the Zealot, an IRS agent called Matthew, the tax collector, and finally, from the shadow pod, Judas, who was going to betray him and make sure he got crucified. So Judas is coming from the shadow pod. And in some senses, Judas is as important to the scheme, as Peter. Our Mary is important to the scheme. So there are going to be Judases in our lifetimes. And these Judases are an important part of our learning how to love and how to grow and how to add our wheel to the evolutionary process. So the question each of us has to ask then is, where is my iPod? Where is my incarnational pod at this stage? To whom do I belong? And what role am I meant to be playing? And how do I respond to people who I identify as part of the shadow pod? Am I going to reject these people or learn from these people? It doesn't mean they have to become my best friend, but they have lessons to teach me. Everybody has lessons to teach me. And we have a job to do as part of this preconception contract. Whatever group you feel you belong to, you're a member of a group that's come down to try to move forward the stuck wheels of human evolution. That's a great question. So you're absolutely right that love is not just a kind of a unipolar phenomenon. When I see Jesus operating in the Gospels, I see that he demonstrates 4 different kinds of love. I call them the 4 C's. The first one is love through confirmation, the kind of the attaboy. Great job, you're doing a great job, Jane. So we took really kind of confirm what people are doing and to applaud them and compliment them for what they're doing. That's a very obvious form of loving somebody, supporting them in their process. The second part is the love of complementarity, that we're part of the same team and that one person has one function in the team and the other person has another function. And I'll use a metaphor to demonstrate this in a few minutes. The third kind of love is compensation, where somebody drops the ball and you're there to try to pick up. It's not your job to do it, but you do it anyway. That's the third kind of love. And the fourth one is confrontation and challenge. Somebody is really screwing up badly and you're going to call their attention to it and tell them this is not okay. So I'm going to just use the metaphor for American football. On Friday nights, I typically go to the counter in Mountain View to have food. And there's always some kind of a ball game going on there. So I get to see 20 minutes of a ball game. And I was watching a ball game last week. I can't remember who was playing, but there was this long pass right down the field. Must have been like a 60-yard pass. And a guy goes up for it. It skids off the top of his hand. The opposition goes to grab at it. And just as he's going to grab at it, a third guy comes up, holds it, comes down, and scores a touchdown. Now that for me is that's a great image of this. So here was a situation where one guy literally dropped the ball. It would have been the end of the game. It was touch or go at that stage. A second guy tried to grab it, he missed it, and the third guy got it and got his 2 feet in the ground inside the end line and scored a touchdown. So in some senses, that's the love of compensation, where somebody drops the ball, and the other guy grabs it and scores the try. The other situation is where we're all parts of the team. Not everybody can be the quarterback. Somebody is the wide receiver, somebody is the nose guard, just grunting inside in the scrum, and that's an important part of the team as well. And there are guys, when they score, we applaud what they do, and then at some stage the coach is going to take somebody off the field because the guy, won't share the ball with anybody. He's not being a team player, and you said you're benched, you're off, you're out for the season or whatever. And Christ does this very, very often in the Gospels, where he's confronting people like the Pharisees. He says stuff like, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You bind heavy loads and you put them on people's shoulders and you won't lift a single finger to help them. Woe to you. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. You have locked the door of the room of wisdom. You won't go in there yourself and you won't let those who want to go in have entry." So he's really putting it in their face. So sometimes that's what we need to do. But it always has to be done with a clean heart. It can never be done with violence. It always has to be done from trying to move the process forward and trying to make people aware of their stuckness, but doing it from a loving heart, even if it's done confrontationally and with challenge. So learning that skill set, because mainly when we come with anger against the enemy, and it's the ego that feels brutalized in some way, it's not the soul that's calling the other into accountability, it's the ego which is bruised, trying to redress the imbalance and make them suffer like they've made us suffer. There are 2 sides always to a situation like that. The first one is, how do I rectify the injustice involved in the situation? But much more importantly, what is the invitation of this event in my life, in my evolutionary process? And that's the more important piece of it. I've shared with you many, many times an experience I had shortly after I'd gone to Kenya. I'd just learned Swahili. I'm living on the edge of the desert in a big, sprawling parish that, just goes right across the equator, a place called Eldama Ravine. And I've been trained for the last year in the seminary in community development, which tells you how to go into an area in a third world country, identify who the leaders are, what the resources are, what the problems are, what the needs are, figure out some kind of a project that addresses the needs, figure out short-term goals, long-term objectives, timelines, whatever, real scientific method. And I'm pontificating at this meeting of the elders, about what we need in this area as a water project. And in the middle of my kind of discourse, an old man at the back of the group with this big bemused smile on me puts up his hand and says, "Can I ask you a question?" And I'm 26, I'm Irish, I know everything. Sure, fire. And he says, "Can you tell me why is it for you Europeans that your only response to a problem is to want to solve it?" And it sounded to me like a Zen koan. Dude, what do you do with the problem except isn't that the whole idea is to solve it? So I said to him, "What do you do when you have a problem?" And I will never forget what he said. We were talking Swahili. But what he said more or less was, he said, "A problem is an invitation to self-transcendence. And if all you do is solve the problem, life will just give you another problem. And if your only response to that one is to solve it, life will give you a third problem." And it's probably maybe the single wisest thing anybody's ever said to me. And so that's the first thing I want to do with the situation is, okay, it's not about how do I solve this issue now between me and that person, but what is the invitation to self-transcendence being offered to me by this interaction, by this enemy figure, or this unfortunate event in my life? What is the invitation for me to grow? And if I can transcend, what happens is I elevate my consciousness, and now I see far more elegant connections and therefore far more elegant responses to the situation. So I'm not coming out of anger anymore, or I'm not coming out of a kind of a ground zero viewpoint. I'm coming up with a bird's eye perspective in which I can understand why this person may have done what they have done, even if I still disagree with it. But now I'm operating from a totally different perspective, in which this person and I are part of the fabric that's creating the kind of the tapestry of life. And I'm going to respond then very differently to it, even if I'm still going to challenge the person. Yeah. Karanina.
The question for me, which is basically what you just said, when something like that happens, is the question of why is this happening?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And it requires kind of standing in the other person's shoes and saying, what are they seeing? What have they experienced? What causes this kind of thing to rise up?
That's brilliant.
And that's really, it takes the ego out of it. If you it's not an easy thing to do always, because there is always the thing that the tendency is to react, and just like a hot stove. It's like,
So it's fascinating to me, as you said, to ask the question, why is this happening to me? It's fascinating to just look at a single word and look at the intonation of it, because it totally changes the meaning of it. I can ask the question, why is this happening to me? And it's like why the hell? Why me? And so I'm railing against my fate. Or the other one is, the one that you've used is, why is this happening? I'm looking for what is the lesson here, what's the opportunity here. It's a totally different response. Although I'm using exactly the same words, but my intonation confers, whether I have one perspective on it or a second. Margaret.
Well, and the other thing is what I have had one thing that just keeps standing out in my mind. And what I had to do is I had to switch around and I had to say, what are they seeing?
Brilliant.
Because I didn't see it.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's great. So you're literally walking in their shoes and looking through their eyes. Yeah, yeah. There's this great notion, I've mentioned it many times, in the near-death literature, near-death experiences. Over 15 million Americans at this stage have reported near-death experiences because of modern, medical technology, the ability to resuscitate people. Over 15 million Americans, just in this one country, have talked about near-death experiences. And part of the near-death experience that fascinates me the most is the life review. Because the life review is a situation where you meet your divine mentor and you review the life that's just ended. Well, it's not quite ended because you're going to come back, but it seems that it's ended. And you're looking at your life, and the entirety of it, comes before you, because there is no time at that stage, so you can re-experience every single event of your life, particularly the significant events, because they're outside of time. But the fascinating thing is, you get to experience it from the perspective of all the people involved in each of the incidents. And it's not like I'm saying, gee, I wonder what Margaret was thinking when I said that to her, or I wonder what Jane was feeling, when I did this to her. It's not that. I get to be Jane. I get to be Margaret in that event. I literally get to experience it as they experience it, not kind of in my imagination, but in reality. And so it's this, exactly as you say, Margaret, the ability to walk around, step into somebody's moccasins, and literally see it through their eyes, not just imagine what it must have been like for them. Yeah.
It takes a very long time to figure it out.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
evident.
Totally.
meaningless,
Yeah.
or whatever you're experiencing from
Yeah.
that person is very evident. But
I think we're going to. My last reincarnational experience was as a young soldier on the Russian front in 1944, being killed, trying to liberate a concentration camp. And the aftermath of it was, you know, I'm dressed as a young Russian, 19-year-old soldier, private, meeting a guy in a German outfit, uniform, a captain, and rising above the battlefield and suddenly realizing this was a drama we'd taken place in. And as souls are leaving the battlefield, hundreds of people being killed on both sides of it, and utter chaos and confusion, starting to laugh and realizing, guys, this was a play we were involved in. It's over. You're not Germans. I'm not a Russian. We're soul beings. So I suspect that very often the result of the life review is literally to burst into uncontrollable belly laughter, to realize I can't believe I actually got stuck in that viewpoint or that perspective, or that I thought I was a soldier, I thought I was Russian, I thought you were the enemy, I thought I should be killing you, and that we just laugh with each other. So I think that sometimes we have to be, it's almost like we can't do it during life. We're lucky if we can do it during life, but mostly it's afterwards we realize the inanity of the belief systems that held us in thrall during an incarnation. Yeah. Karen.
Just going to follow on what Margaret said too, was sometimes it takes us a really long time. It is a real moment of grace when something flips. You know, either from what you're thinking or something triggers it and you think, oh, it wasn't anything like
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
It's a real gift.
Totally.
They don't come for every situation, but they do come.
Totally. Yeah. And that's great when it happens, and it's even better if in the absence of understanding why it happened, that I can understand, that I can believe somehow it's important that it happened. I can't see the connections at this stage. I believe there's significance to it, there's importance to it, and there's a message in it.